You will get the most from any Systems to Win video when you launch it from its video homepage.
In this video, you're going to learn how to use your Systems to Win assessment templates. That could be your lean assessment template, which is named toassess.xlsx, which is used to assess the progress of a lean transformation. Or it could be your 5S assessment template, which is used for 5S assessment. Now, any Systems to Win assessment templates can be very similar so that when you learn to use one, you know how to use them all. Like any Systems to Win template, you will start by clicking the button to open a blank sheet. And it will remind you to rename your new sheet. So let's do that. Let's right-click that tab and rename it. Maybe we'll name it Our Team. But then we notice that it's blank. There's no data, and that's why all those charts are blank. And we go, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if they gave us some sample data? That's the purpose of the sample sheet. The sample sheet has 3 columns of sample data, which is the minimum amount of data needed for a chart to show anything. And then we say, oh, that's great that it's got sample data, but how do I use this thing? That's the purpose of the online training. So we click this link, which opens the web page that has the online training, as well as this training video that you're watching right now. And if we scroll down just a little on this page, we see that it starts with training for what we've already shown you in this video for how to find and open your template. And it also says that your leaders might have already personalized your master template for your own unique assessment criteria. And if they did, then it tells you what to do about that. But let's show you. Now, normally there's really nothing special for you as the user to do. You just follow the instructions for how to use a template that we're about to show you in the rest of this video. The only difference is that your leaders have already personalized your master template, so it has your assessment criteria instead of the default generic assessment criteria. But if you look up there in that top row, there's always a help link in every Systems to Win template. If instead of looking like this, if you see this pink message, like we see on this lean assessment template here, that tells you that your leaders are attempting to communicate with you. And if you click that link, it'll take you to this section where your leaders should have left you a note to tell you, hey, we have multiple sets of different types of assessment criteria in a single template here. And they should have instructions to teach you how do you switch between office and production lean assessment criteria, for instance. And the way you do it is you select the Translations and Substitutions button, and then select that first menu item. And then we're going to change the language to Chinese just to make things really obvious. But more commonly, you would leave it at English, and then you would use the drop-down list. And then you would choose from the drop-down list that your leaders created for the different user substitute phrases. For instance, they might have office versus production assessment criteria. And then when you click the OK button, it'll ask if you want to switch to your chosen language and assessment criteria. And that might take a moment because it's doing a lot behind the curtain. It will have your chosen language if it was something other than English, or much more commonly, it will simply switch between the different sets of assessment criteria that your leaders created. And remember, that's only if your leaders left you the pink note telling you that they created multiple sets of assessment criteria in a single template. If there is no pink note, then that means that there's only one set of assessment criteria. So all you need to do is start using your template, which is what we'll show you how to do next. So back on our online training page, it says that on a periodic basis, It's probably weekly or bi-weekly for 5S. It might be monthly or quarterly for a lean assessment. You're going to fill in the printed checklist in handwriting. In other words, you never, ever, ever do a lean assessment of any kind sitting at a computer. In your template, you're going to click this button to print the audit checklist. And what that will do is print a checklist consisting of just these 3 columns that I've highlighted here. And then with a pencil and a paper and a clipboard, you go out to the Gemba, to the physical place where the work is being done, and you observe. You don't do this behind your desk. And then when you come back to your desk, you're going to physically transcribe your handwritten scores to your electronic worksheet. And when you're done transcribing all those handwritten scores, you're going to click this button to add to history. And notice how there are no columns for history after we click the button. Now there's one. And if we go over to the sample sheet, we see that once we've recorded at least 3 columns of data, then the charts will start showing data. And notice that just to the right of the charts, there is a section where your leaders can define what are they looking for a level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And if you click this button, then that will print a sheet of your assessment criteria that you can carry with you on your clipboard along with your printed assessment form. And you can even follow this link to get advanced training for how to get consistent scores from diverse auditors. And we already showed you the next step to transcribe scores from your handwritten checklist to your electronic version. But what we haven't yet discussed is comments. Now, it can be argued that comments are the single most important part of the entire audit, because your goal is not to just fill in a bunch of freaking paperwork. Your goal is to identify opportunities for improvement, and comments are your single most powerful way to do that. So on your printed assessment scorecard that you carry around with your clipboard, at the bottom of each section, there'll be white space where you can optionally enter handwritten comments. So here's another section for visual controls, and you see that at the bottom of each section, there's empty space for comments. Now for every single miss, there should be a comment explaining the reason for the miss. And there should also be comments for ideas that you discuss in your daily stand-up meetings for how to improve this process. Now there are 2 schools of thought for what to do with those comments. Some people just like to keep a 3-ring binder of their printed sheets, and that's that for that. They don't waste their time transcribing comments. But others like to have an electronic archive of their comments, and your Systems to Win templates have special features for that. On your assessment template, if you scroll down below the usual print area, you will find this section where you can optionally keep a permanent archive of all of your comments. Now for each date, you can enter an unlimited number of rows of comments. But if you have multiple comments per date, it's a really smart idea to use your first comment as a summary, and we'll show you why in just a moment when we get to the training for the scorecard sheet. And if we click this button to print comments, then that will print that section of comments. The entire section. Of course, you could always hide rows for older comments if you only want to print the most recent ones. It's Excel. Use what you know about Excel. And now back on our online training page, let's scroll down to the next instruction where it tells us to click that button to add to history to transfer the data from the score column to the history column. And we already showed you that once, but let's do it again. We've already transcribed our handwritten scores into this column. And notice that there are 3 columns of history. When we click the Add to History button, now there are 4. And all of the charts have been updated. So now I'm ready to actually use all this data that I collected. I'm ready to print this assessment scorecard and post it on our team accountability board so that we can talk about things in our next stand-up meeting. How do I do that? When I click this button to print trends, that will print this section of the scorecard that shows the criteria and the results with the charts. And notice that it prints this time in landscape instead of portrait. Now here's a useful tip. Once you've been using this for a long time, you might accumulate a lot of columns of data. Let's pretend for a second that instead of 5 columns of data, we had 35 columns of data, and we're starting to run out of room when we go to print things. So how do we make that a little more readable? Now your first inclination might be to select the columns that you want to hide and then right click and hide those columns. But watch what happens to the charts when I do that. The charts only show the data for the unhidden columns, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to use Control Z to undo and show those columns again. And this time I'm going to right click my selected columns and select column width instead. And I'm going to specify a column width of 0.1, which is the minimum size, to make those columns almost invisible and yet still have the charts reflect their data. Now when I print, I see just the most recent history in the columns, but I see the full history in the charts. And here's another useful tip. Let's say that somehow my charts got resized or in the wrong place or munched. Somehow they got messed up. When I click the Print Trends button, it automatically fixes my charts. And if you want to manually change where your pages break, then follow the online training. Learn how to use Excel. So your printed Lean Assessment Scorecard is really useful for showing trends over time. But what if I want to see a snapshot in time? How do I do that? That's what the scorecard sheet is for. That has a sheet that shows an overall score and thermometer chart for each of your sections. And when we scroll down, it has a radar chart and comments. And on this scorecard sheet, we can select the Systems to Win tab and then click this button to choose source data, which brings up this window, which will show you a list of all of the worksheets that have any data. In this case, all I have is sample data. Normally, you would be choosing a sheet that has your real data. And then once you've chosen a sheet, it will show you the dates of columns of data to choose from. And when I click OK, it shows the overall score and thermometer charts, as well as a radar chart and comments for that chosen date. Now notice that that top comments box is going to already contain your summary comments from that date. That's why we told you to use the first comments box for that date as a summary, because that will show up when you select that date on this chart. The lower comments, the additional comments, are really useful for handwriting with a red magic marker on your printed scorecard to call attention to something. And notice that in this case, the radar chart and the thermometer charts have 12 categories. So let's go over to our sample sheet, and then let's select all the rows for categories 10, 11, and 12. And then let's hide those rows because we're not using those sections. And then back on our scorecard sheet, let's click that same Choose Source Data button, and then choose the same date on that same sample sheet. But this time when we click the OK button, watch what happens to the radar chart and the number of categories in the thermometer charts. They automatically rescale to show only those sections that are unhidden on the source sheet. And then you can use regular Control P or your favorite way of printing to print this snapshot in time, which you can then also publish on your team accountability board. And back on our training page, those are the final two steps. To publish your results, where your stakeholders can easily find them and talk about them. And of course, the single most important step of any process improvement method is to ponder, think, reflect, and actually make improvements to your process. Your goal is not to fill out an annoying form. Your goal is to actually improve the process. In fact, if you are not regularly reviewing the results of your audits with both your coach and your team, then you are doing it wrong. In fact, there's no reason for doing this at all if you skip the review part.